Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design. Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hi, Dani. How are you?
How are you? Good. We have a guest with us today.
Yeah, exciting.
Yes, we have Chris Taylor with us. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Dani and Peter. Yeah, so I'm 53 years old. I've been living in New Zealand for 20 years. I'm married with 4 children, born and raised in the northeast of England. Trained as an engineer, actually, a chemical environmental engineer, and had a 20-year career in that space. But when I got to my early 40s, my foot itching was getting a bit annoying. So I parachuted into another world of personal development and coaching. And in fact, that's how we connected, Dani, 7 years ago in National Speakers Association. So I enjoy keeping fit. I go to the gym, I do some mountain biking, play snooker of all things. My children call me an old man when I say I'm going to play snooker, but hey, I love it. Yeah, that's about me in a nutshell.
Are you, just out of curiosity, are any of your kids in teenage years yet?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I don't think there's anything that you could do at that stage that doesn't get you called an old man.
I could actually, my 19-year-old just moved back in. She's between flats, so I could pull a laptop up and show you her bed, and that's like a synopsis of the chaotic teenage mind. Um, yeah, so I've got 19, 17, then I've got a 7 and an 8-year-old as well. So all girls.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Hence the Chrome Dome.
So you've had a book come out recently.
I have, yes.
Huh? You want to
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the book, long time coming, probably 6 years. Maybe the time you and I first connected, I was bubbling around, Dani, with, oh, should I write a book? Should I not? Ended up just talking about it for probably 6 years. And about 15 months ago, I was on a mountain bike with my friend Brent, and we were talking about publishing. He's done 2 books, and he said, Chris, do the beep book. And I thought, you know what, Brent, you're right. I've got no excuses now. So I jumped on the horse of authoring, recruited a book coach, and it was initially going to be a memoir, but it was flipped into being a memoir with a message. So it's nonfiction, short life stories with an aha moment and some insights and learnings for the reader. Yeah, I actually finished the content about a year ago. Sounds a bit strange. So where are we now? February 24. I finished the content in March 23, and then about 2 months in copy editing, and then about 7 months in design and layout and print publishing and delivery. So literally got delivered to my doorstep today. Where are we now? 9th of February. Yeah.
How did that feel then, Chris, with the the book arriving on your doorstep after that journey?
You know what, Peter? It was like, wow, this is the real deal now. It's pulling up on a truck in 2 pallets. After fielding all the questions over the months of how's the book going? How's
Hmm.
the book going? How's the book going? I can now say the book is here.
Mhm.
So yeah, really overjoyed and grateful. I'm very lucky to have the space time to author. Very, very, humble to be able to dedicate space and time for a book. And I've already given one copy to my personal trainer and one to a friend of mine he's actually bought a copy. Um,
Like a true friend would.
he's a lawyer. So yeah, enjoyed. I just showed Dani before we hit record that all the boxes at the bottom of my stairs. So I'm waiting to see my wife's face when she sees, like 80 boxes by the front door.
Has she read it?
Yeah, she was great actually. Through the drafting and the copy editing, I had in fact, I might be able to show you here. You see on the shelf there, you see here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's the train of development. And there's the book dummies. These are the drafts which I edited. So yeah, Ange, my wife Angela, she read a few chapters. Yeah, really overjoyed. So yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, congratulations.
thank you very much.
For the listener, Chris just showed us his copy in his bookshelf, and basically what sprang to mind for me was the kind of prototyping and iteration, like brought to life. There was different versions of the book, obviously clearly in there. So yeah, we love prototyping and iteration and finding our way forwards, learning our way forwards. Chris.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, iteration is quite right. I mean, when I had the copy editor on board, he said, "How do you want to work?" And I said, "I trust you. Do your thing. I'm not interested in sifting through tiny track changes."
Hmm.
So, and he was amazing. And then, I had to let go of perfection. I got the final draft, and I said, my book coach says, "Get your looking glass out. This is your last chance to pick up any blips and blobs." And you know what? I thought, nah, I'm done. Let's print this thing. And maybe it's a humanoid reflection. If there is the odd broken word, or if there's some blips, there's bound to be blips in it. I've just got to accept that and let it go and make,
Hmm.
it's part of life.
Hmm.
The design phase did take quite a long time. That the designer had some challenges in the software that he used. So, but I think patience is a great teacher. I said to myself, look, no one really cares whether the book comes out in February 24 or June 24. I mean, just let it go, Chris. It'll
Hmm.
come when it comes.
So many good nuggets in there for design thinkers, right? One, what I really appreciated about seeing your stack of how the book progressed is oftentimes we see the final product of something and we don't really appreciate that to get to that finished book, all the crap that came before it, right? Like I'm sure you wrote your first draft and it wasn't pretty, but it took you writing that unpretty draft to get to the pretty draft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit like a statue chiseling, eh? You have a block, and the first draft is, oh, I can see the head, or oh, that's an arm, and you think, oh, right, hang on, that's a belt. And then you sort of go, macro to granular. But
Mm.
as I said, perfectionism strangles everyone. So just let it go. I'm happy. Maybe the imperfections might be a great speech or a talking point or a learning.
Hmm.
Mm.
Um, and then it's entrusting those around you. I mean, I had a team of maybe 4 or 5 people to help me produce, design, develop. They're brilliant artists in their own niche. So I entrusted them because they're good at it and they've done lots of it.
I think also the other point there is around, I think sometimes we don't put something out into the world, and I'm certainly guilty of this because it's not perfect. And then it then it never gets out there because you're waiting for it to be perfect.
So that's a mindset loop. I've got a story in the book about, combating perfection. I won't spoil it for you, but it was about my father-in-law correcting I've got a small wall downstairs that's wonky from the earthquakes. Yeah, I won't spoil the story, but it is about that. It's about, accepting imperfection. And often no one notices. In fact, ironically, I did some notes for the podcast in my book here. This is my journal. I don't know if you can see a graphic there. Do you see that? That's kind of a
Yeah, yeah,
perfection. So that's the sort of top left. That's the unachievable infinite mindset. But
yeah.
many, yeah, it's accepting what other people can visualize and recognize.
Mm.
Um, and often they won't have the acuity to recognize, 99% because they're happy with 80%. And that's great.
Well, and then if you think about it, like I'm not buying your book to check out what grammar mistakes are there or what typos are in there. Like when you buy a book, you're buying it because the topic interests you and you want to read it. And it's about the message. Granted, I mean, if you bought a book and it was like just not well written, it's not a good experience either. But if there's a couple of typos in there or a hanging word, I don't know that I'm going to go, wow, this book is rubbish. Let's just
Yeah. I guess that opens up the topic of judgment, of inner judgment.
Hmm.
Of if I do have a typo and it's with a journalist or a interviewer or I don't know, a top end reviewer, we've got tendency of humans to blow up that little grain of sand in our mind's eye to be a a rock.
Mm.
And that's part of our, our Jungian shadow at work
Ha.
of savage judgment. I'm pretty comfortable now. Although, because it's my first book, I did want it to be as best as it could be. But incidentally, my book coach says all the big New York houses ordinarily have between 15 and 20 blips. Whether it's a book by a big name, some grains of sand will get through no matter what.
Interesting. And I imagine that those big publishing houses have big teams working on books to try and keep that 15 to 20 as low as possible. I'm going to guess.
Yeah, I imagine so. They've got quite a machinery. The big houses, the Random Houses, and the Simon and Schuster's. They'll have armies of editors, and I don't know. Maybe our AI friend is muscling in on this editing occupation now. I mean,
yeah, I would imagine so.
I think that will be interesting to see, like, imagine being able to write knowing that AI will just, but assuming that it picks up the right things and corrects it to the right thing.
Yeah. Has it been trained in the right way?
Yeah. Particularly with English, because it's a bit complex, where we have like words that sound the same but spelled different, or spelled the same, pronounced different based on context. So that would be interesting. The topic that we really wanted to get into with you, Chris, today is around, so in design thinking, we talk about failure being an opportunity to learn. And if you want to progress, and it applies to innovation, it applies to change. If you want to get from where you are to another state or another level or somewhere else than where you are, you have to be willing to fail, because, when you try something new, there's the chance that you're going to fail, and you have to think about the failure as a learning opportunity. And I felt like a lot of the stories and the topics in your book really touch on that. And I think in having talked to you before, you really wanted to share how you've used your not so successful moments to learn and grow. So I wanted to see if we can dive into that with you today.
Yeah, it's interesting, even the word failure. What does that infer or insinuate when you hear it? Just the word itself, and success and failure. Is it binary? Is it granular between the two? I mean, there is that saying that all action or motion is experience. So if you harness the experience from that step, do we even need to say the word? Because it has a grayness to it, and it's almost a savagery to it, failure. I don't think I think too much about failure myself. I don't think I take myself too seriously about things that don't work out. And I think maybe it's a personality thing. I I move on fairly readily. I actually wrote this. Written down here, your recovery will be in proportion with the depth and length you think about the failure.
What I take away from that is, the more that you think about your failure as a failure, the longer it'll take you to recover.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Maybe the storification of that thing that didn't quite work out. It's all a historical manifestation in your mind's eye. So the more promptly we can put that in its box and move on. I mean, I see great sports people doing that. I look at, say, the rise of Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, and I watched him 6 years ago, and thought he was probably on the way out, and how he has risen. And I think he's done a lot of mindset work and, meditation, but I think he will contextualize or even become to cuddle and love failure. I mean, I watched the game. He went out in the Australian Open against Sinner, and Sinner just played amazing. And Djokovic said it was his worst slam ever, but I really felt, I'm no tennis expert, but on that day, he was just beaten by the better person. But yeah, failure, I personally favor just viewing it as experience and learning and adaptation. If you look at the book I've just published, I mean, I was green as the paddock 18 months ago, and now I'm well, I'm 20% clued in to do my next book because of that experience. But I needed expertise in order to come to the position I'm in today. I think about my marriages. So I've been married 3 times, which sounds kind of crazy. And then I think to myself, I've written about this in the book as well, is that a combination of not knowing yourself, not knowing who you are, maybe not understanding the gravity of commitment in a marriage, sort of queuing into the fast food disposable nature of much of the way the world rolls in the West now. Everything just trade in, get another one, get another burger, get another marriage. Do I see that as for my wife's been married before as well? But I think for listeners, perhaps even just that word, if you
Mm.
substitute failure for experience, that might could be really useful. It's just experience. And as you say, knowledge, whether you're designing whatever, a house or a process plant, you have to have a means of capturing knowledge. And if the knowledge is through something that didn't go well, that's a great thing. I'm thinking of Elon Musk's attitude to SpaceX against NASA, that the amazing differential in their philosophies of learning and adaptation for spaceflight, where
Mm.
Musk says, hey, look, we're going to lose 5 to 7 rockets. It's going to cost us 500 million US dollars. But hey, we're going to get a human being into space for $500,000 compared to like 80 million by NASA, who were designing ad infinitum to try and absorb out risk, and they still lost a couple of shuttles. And I guess the traditionalists would think, the astronauts from the 50s and the 60s would think you're crazy to foster a failure culture. But he
Yeah.
said, well, no, we want to learn as fast as we can, and we're accepting we're going to lose 5 to 7 rockets. And we're going to get the cost of a pilot up in the moon or maybe in Mars in a few years.
I think, yeah, that, SpaceX, Elon Musk, but, for better or worse versus NASA, I think it's a really great example of, as you said yourself, it's a mindset, and a mindset that can become, I guess, a culture permeating through an organization. I imagine there's going to be leaders in NASA, for example, who probably gravitate more towards the SpaceX mindset. I'm going to imagine that there's less of the opposite. Where I'm curious to kind of explore is, yeah, this mindset, of reframing failure as opportunity to learn. And I don't know, we'll bring it back to, from a corporate to, or an organization, to us as individuals. What are some of the practical ways that you've experienced yourself, that, maybe it comes down to self-talk. What do you do? My kind of, I guess, my feeling or hypothesis, there's something innate in our human brains that makes us kind of fall into the failure trap, if you like, if I
Yeah.
can describe it as that. And what we have to do is consciously make an effort to think about this word failure in a different way. Yeah,
Yeah.
somewhere in there's a question, maybe.
Well, I think fundamentally this is slightly philosophical, but you,
Yeah.
you have to accept the inescapable reality of failure.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
can't escape that reality.
Huh.
You can build a car, build a rocket, build a house, and your knowledge base is moderate to low.
Yeah.
You can't reverse out a law of human evolution by pretending you're going to get it right. Nobody wants it, of course. It's a paradox.
Hmm.
It's an intrinsic inevitability of human evolution.
Hmm.
We don't want it, it's not desirable, but it's an inescapable reality. But I
Hmm.
do think the languaging, the dialogue, the inner voice, who and what you're surrounded by, your inner sense of belief of self and endeavor and motivation is fundamental. Letting go of external judgment is like, wow, let's puncture that balloon because no one really cares because they're so wound up in their own challenges and problems in life. Let's just roll on. My personal trainer, who's a road cyclist fundamentally, and I've mentioned him at least 3 times in the book, has a remarkable sense of personal endurance to doing things with his body. And of course, mind and body is all one system. The body will just do what the mind says. And he's got remarkable endurance. And I said to him literally this morning, I said, what people might be interested in from you is how you can hold on to that rope, that 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes longer than the other person. What's in it about his DNA, his attitude, his being that enables that sort of level of performance. I can't speak too objectively in the corporate space. I haven't really worked in the corporate space for maybe 15 years.
Hmm.
Certainly, I do believe there needs to be. I love what Brené Brown has brought to the world in the vulnerability space. I do believe sincerely that here in New Zealand, we need to have more embracement of fallibility and vulnerability right from the top, right from the top. We need CEOs to be humble and vulnerable, to empower and engage their workforce to say, hey, it's okay to have a bad day. So I think that's incredibly important because it's a falsification of getting things right, of being stoic and being in an old school sort of command and control environment in a corporate organization.
Hmm.
I've got on here, I don't know whether you can see this. This is my snake there. Can you see the snake?
Yeah.
So this is on my notes here just for the listeners. And I've called it my spotty snake of job interview failures.
Oh.
And I've been shortlisted for three CEO roles, one in 2007, one in 2011, one in 2014. Didn't get any of them. I've said to myself, well, I wasn't right for them. And maybe they weren't right for Chris.
Mhm.
One of the things that I talk about and discover through my research is that oftentimes people confuse failing at something as being the same thing as I am a failure. You can go for it, you can interview for a job, get shortlisted, not get the job. And that interview process was a failure, but that doesn't make you, the individual, a failure. Like, how do you make that detachment?
I think it's far more deeper and harmful for the inner voice to label ourselves as a failure. That's so disempowering and almost tragic. I think maybe a means to do that is to objectify what's outside of you, be it, the job, the relationship, the sports team you miss out on, is to say, and this is written about, I think, by, psychologists, and to dissociate your transit through life with the task or the job. Um, to say I didn't quite, like I've said in my notes here, I didn't quite meet the standard.
Hmm.
Oh, hey, I didn't quite meet the standard for the job, and I say, hey, well, that's good actually. I I I basically applied for my old job about 18 months ago. And this is quite funny. In a particular low point, and I got down to I was shortlisted, and I was interviewed by this gentleman, and he said this question to me, and I knew when he said the question I was in the wrong place, doing the wrong thing.
Hmm.
And he said, "What's your brand, Chris?"
Ah.
And I went, "Oh my goodness, not that question." And that was a moment of weakness. I was going back to comfort and security in a salaried managerial position. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question there.
No, I think it did because I think what you were talking about is that disassociation between the thing that you tried to do that didn't work out and who you are. Like,
Yeah.
you can be a success, you can be smart, you can be very good at what you do, and you can still fail at some things.
I think it's healthy to say to ourselves, I'm a moral, conscionable, good person. And
Mm.
I navigate this world being moral and conscionable and with a generous nature. And if we
Hmm.
believe that as humans, I sincerely believe that, missing the job or, yeah, I don't know, getting dumped by your girlfriend, or you just say, hey, well, I still believe that I'm a moral, conscionable, good person. And without heading into sort of law of attraction territory, I do think when you have that energy and aura,
Mm.
the universe will look at that and think, oh, Danny's a good person. Oh, look what comes along for Danny. Yeah, but if you get entwined in a gray negative spiral about your being and yourself, you're going to wear it on your face, your language, your energy, your humor, the people you attract or repel. And I'm saying this sitting here in New Zealand, and there's so many challenges in the world, and so many challenges and tragedies and misfortunes and injustices. And yeah, but to answer your question, I think if you can soberly objectify the event or the person or the job, and have that sense of separation from being and self, to
Mm.
I think that's a pretty solid stance to have.
The idea that you are not your job, you're definitely not your job. Yeah, that can be really helpful.
Because then that brings into the realm of identity.
Hmm.
If you identify, and I hear this about corporate America, if
Hmm.
it's savage, if the CEO gets fired, there's his or her identity is completely melded around the ego and persona of this role.
Hmm.
And imagine, you've got children, you've got other responsibilities. You can't afford to let that collapse you. I think, Jordan Peterson speaks very well about this in his teachings and learnings. As you say, you can't, if you put your soul and your belief structure around a job or a title, you're not in control of that. That gets
Hmm.
taken away, which is an imminent threat today. Where does that leave you?
I can certainly resonate with that, having spent most of my career in large corporates. I didn't really realize how much of my identity, like I would introduce myself as Chesson from insert name of organization. And I didn't really realize how much my identity was wrapped up in the corporate identity until I left. And then I had to introduce myself like, hi, I'm Dani. And then I was struggling like, what do I say now?
Hmm.
And then for a while, I used to say, I'm Dani, formerly from. And in that scenario, I decided to leave, right? I left on my own terms. I left on good terms, but that detachment was still difficult because your
Hmm.
identity gets so wrapped up. And so I can only imagine how much harder that is if it was like you were restructured out or you were fired, because then you didn't even get to do that on your own terms. And now your
Yeah.
identity is so wrapped up in it.
I mean, it's all status, right? It's all
Mm.
it's all the falsification of status, and in a corporate organization, the subtle fostering of compliance is there, and it's so I totally empathize with you there. I mean, I've had it leaving engineering, leaving a corporate engineering career. What do you do? Who do you work for? And I
Hmm.
said, well, kind of work for myself. All right. So the inherent status and judgment in the question is pervasive in the West, but well done on moving out of corporate. I know a number of professional speakers who speak very candidly and eloquently about self-expression outside of a corporate environment.
It might sound obvious, but to me, there's a direct and very strong connection between this idea of failure or fear of failure and our identity becoming too closely linked or intertwined with the job we do at the company we work in. Because, as you say, our things like status start to become bound up in it, and we become consciously or not afraid of losing that status and that identity.
Yeah. I mean, there's a total paradox in organizationally, as maybe you two have researched and studied. If you have an abrasive compliance and anti-fear culture in the workforce, they will be less liberated to experiment with their
Hmm.
skills, with their innovation.
Hmm.
They're going to be boxified. They'll be stifled, and creativity and self-expression is fostered where you say, "Hey, look, we're not going to get everything right. If you goof up, that's cool. Let's do an investigation to correct that loophole." And
Hmm.
then that's such an affirming and liberating experience. I can think of one company locally here they're a civil engineering organization, and the business owner slash leader actively embraces that you're not going to get it right. But I want you learning as fast as you can to, build this bridge or build this wastewater treatment plant. And he empowers the workforce to be more liberated.
Hmm.
And construction's a rough game. It's a rough, tight margin game. Yeah, it's just embracing that reality. We're not going to get things right.
And I think Peter and I could probably list 100 organizations between the two of us where there's this paradox of like we want innovation and creativity, but we want it without any risk or failure.
I think, Danny, there's a organizations that are led by financially stoic leaders are intrinsically conservative, and they're anti-experimentation without an objective rear view mirror bottom line. Say you've got a chartered accountant background type CEO, they get really anxious about research projects or things that don't have a guaranteed buck. So I think the philosophy of the leader is critical here. And I do honestly see the leadership here, I'm generalizing here, promoting financially, prudent and stoic uh, sort of financial scientists to leadership positions. And for me, they're way too conservative. Um, and it's boring, it's like, let's have some fun. And
It's about balance, right? Like there's a bit of an irony because experimenting. So I worked for leaders that often allowed you to experiment and fail on what they called a low cost failure. And that's where the whole concept of like fail fast and fail early and fail often kind of come from, right? You want to do that in the early stages so that you haven't invested billions of dollars doing something and then failing versus,
yeah,
if you it's a very different story if you lose $10,000 trying something out versus $10 million trying something out. I agree with you that the mindset of the leader is important. I think the caveat I would build there is like it has to also be balanced. Like it can't just
yeah,
be we're going to go out and take every risk in the world. You need to have financial accountability, and organizations work in lots of organizations have regulatory responsibilities, but I think what's happened is that it's off kilter. Like we've become so obsessed with regulatory obligations and financial obligations that we forget that part of business is also about innovating and changing and doing new things and
yeah.
keep moving forward.
I think it also depends on what's the prize. What's the prize here? Imagine you had a magnificent grand vision, and everyone says, "No, Danny, don't do that," or "Peter, Chris, don't do that. That's crazy. It's risky. It'll never work." And I, for some reason, James Dyson comes into my head. The British inventor. Everyone thought he was nuts in the early 1970s. What do you mean a reverse cyclone Hoover? We've all got Hoovers. They've all got bags in them, and a brilliant inventor mind through, 210 prototypes. The pain, the bank saying, "Go away, James." And now he must be giggling into his cornflakes because everyone's trying to imitate and rip off Dyson's technology. I mean, there's lots of stories about Richard Branson, with the bank saying no to Virgin Airlines. So I think it depends on the prize. It depends on the character and the belief of the innovator or the entrepreneur and how close they are prepared to sail to the wind. Are they prepared to put that yacht right on that angle? Then holy moly, next morning there's a dead calm. But it is highly individualistic. And it's accepting that creation and innovation does have an expense. But you're quite right, Danny. I think there's a pragmatism to wrap around it. But the pragmatism and the mechanics is fundamentally down the organization, the culture, what's their attitude to risk and reward.
And I guess the thing with that is like if you think about the Bransons and the Dysons and Jobs and all of these people, you don't really like most people don't really understand the thing that they're after until they've experienced it, right? The idea of not having a smartphone now just seems like idiotic. But at the time that Jobs was like envisioning this and talking about it, people were probably like, well, why do we need that?
Yeah.
One of my favorite people, and actually my dog's named after him, Walt Disney, and I read his biography frequently because when he came up with the idea of buying this swampland essentially and turning it into this theme park, and he was convinced that there was a way to do it that would attract not just children but families and adults. And you look at Disney now, I go to Disneyland anytime I'm traveling back to the US. Like, that's one of my favorite things to do. I don't have children. I have Disney Plus and watch all the movies again. Two adults living in this household. And then you kind of think about how much part of my life Disney is. And at the time he was trying to get these things off the ground, people thought he was nuts. Like, who's going to spend money on that?
I think that's the power of the visionary and the luminary. You're labeled insane, but they've just got something. It's that half of 1% of humans that see it. The Musks and the Walt Disneys, the Michelangelos, Galileos. It's through history. You're nuts, but they've just got something that's special and unique, and they have fortitude to. Actually, I read. Speaking of fortitude, I've had a mind link to the book by Dan Crenshaw on fortitude. It talks about America, in the time of threat of democracy, that he's from a military background. And anyway, the book's about how do we foster personal fortitude, which links in with resilience and, coping with failure when he was blown up in Iraq and lost an eye. But I think also all these great things, you have to inspire, those around you, your team, your aura, your language, your humor, your stories, your fallibility, even to have create an en masse following to make these amazing brand visions real. You hear stories about Jobs and Disney, they were quite, they were bullies, they were relentless, they were maybe they felt they had to be to secure and deliver their vision of, putting a rocket in space or building a theme park. Um, they're relentless. I think that's what I've learned in recent readings about these magnificent achievements is there's just a relentlessness that is an exception to most people are lazy. Yeah. I mean, let's just name that. I can be too, we can all be, but they've got this sort of enduring sense of commitment, energy to get up and do what they do to build their vision. And it's remarkable, really.
Do you think that a lot more people start out with that sort of fortitude, but then we're forced into systems like school and then corporations, and it just sort of gets beaten out of us?
I guess a number of the people I think of were non-conformist. If you think of some of the greats, they didn't comply to traditional vehicles of, institutions, education. They were radicals in a way. I mean, Branson was quite a radical. If you think about society and sociology, the compliance culture, they want compliant and individuals in society. So to do something that's innovative, whether in business or science, it takes somebody who's has a special calling and courage to leave that compliant culture.
It makes me curious about, I wonder, well, what do we know about, say, Disney or Branson or Jobs? What's their kind of attitude to the word we were exploring earlier, that failure? You know, on the one hand, do they just not see it as a possibility? Or on the other hand, do they see it and choose to completely disregard it, ignore it, or further along that spectrum, do they see it, acknowledge it, accept it? And yeah, it makes me curious about what, if that's the case, then how they are kind of framing it up. I mean, I guess they must have been something similar to what you were describing earlier, Chris, about reframing it.
For some reason, I've got this metaphor of a bulldozer going through a field right now.
Oh yeah.
And you're going to have humps and bumps and troughs and valleys. And
Yeah.
I think a little bump to someone might be a mountain. That, oh, it's a mountain. We'll have to stop here. Whereas if you had the power and fortitude of, say, a Branson or a Jobs, they're over the other side, like before you even click your fingers. So maybe
Yeah.
it's a mindset of acceptance, but even the vision and the feeling of it is maybe different in their DNA, how they process this experience of something not working out. Maybe they laugh at it, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe they think it's amusing, and we all know humor connects and excites when it's. I think that there's just a uniqueness to them for their bulldozer to carry on no matter what,
Yeah.
and to not stop or doubt themselves, and just hold on to that belief. I mean, I watched the Musk Netflix, the SpaceX, and when that fifth rocket went up, he's like he's hiding under the desk. He doesn't want to talk to the media. Yeah, he's a special human. These people are rarities. These Bransons, the Jobs, the Musks. But then I think it would say my wife, who's a surgeon in New Zealand and massively challenging in the public health system right now. It really is, running on the smell of an oily rag and goodwill. And what all those medical professionals, what they're faced with the division, the politics, the negative media to get up and we're talking about Elon Musk here, but my lovely wife here to carry on in public health is that takes character, stoicism, and a real sense of public conscience to.
Again, that kind of speaks to, in a way, that speaks to that reward. We talked a moment ago about risk and reward, and the kind of the reward that individuals get from the work that they do. It's different for everybody, but someone who's giving their working life at least, and probably more in some cases, to public service, like a surgeon in a New Zealand public health service. That's a reward. And as you were talking there, I think we all make choices, and it's a choice that that people like your wife are making to, despite all the obstacles in the way, it's a choice they're making to turn up every day and do the best that they can. And in the same way, it's a choice for us to, I suppose, accept that we're going to fail sometimes.
I think there's one simple, I'll float this out there.
Yeah.
Say if it's the New Zealand public health system, they're not listening. So we're talking about failure here. We're talking about, we do some coaching, and fundamentally, if you don't listen to your staff, your people, that's a real problem. But there ain't much listening. And you'd think, well, yeah, of course we're listening, but there's not a great deal of evidence currently that there is, genuine parking agendas, just hearing the workforce on the floor, the doctors and nurses and all the staff. Who's being listened to?
And I think in our work, Peter, we see this a lot, right? Because a core principle of design thinking is you need to go talk to the people that you're designing things for, the people that you're providing a service to, a product to. You need to be engaging with them. You need to be hearing them. And I think even when organizations go out and listen, even though organizations go out and ask for their voice, very few of them actually action based on the voices that they've heard. So it becomes, we're going to go here, we're going to go ask people a bunch of questions, then we're going to go do whatever we want us to do anyway. And we see that happening.
Yeah, they're maybe, and I'll probably get this the wrong way around, they're hearing, but they're not listening. Or is it they're listening, but not hearing? But I think going around again to an absence of listening or choosing, making the choice not to listen can sometimes come from a belief that there's no need to listen, because the belief that whether you're an individual or a leadership group or a politician or someone, is actually right. So there's no need to listen because you have the answer. And I think what we were talking about in this conversation is kind of the opposite of that. I don't have the answer. I've got a bunch of questions, and I'm curious, and I'd like to find out the answer to this. Maybe some of the ways that I tried to find out the answer, 3 of them will be wrong, 1 of them will be right.
I'd go back to vulnerability, because you need to be vulnerable to listen. You need to accept, to park your ego and to accept that there might be another way that works that you haven't thought of. So even I see it in New Zealand a lot, socially, in the workplace. No one's really listening, genuinely listening, with empathy and compassion, with an open mind to accepting, oh, wow, hey, Dani, that's a great way. I'd never have thought of that. So the whole acceptance of a new way or some new knowledge, there's a lot of social construct barriers to that around, saying I've got to get it right myself. I don't want to show my weakness by working with someone. The need to be right, and the ego hardwire is. So I would say the listening, and there's a hardwire between listening and vulnerability. I remember 30 years ago, I was a contracts engineer for a small manufacturer. They used to do little water plants, and I was like 26, 27, and the contracts director is a guy called John, and I noticed our procurement process was quite archaic. It was like there's about 7 levels to buy a little valve, and I had this idea to truncate the procurement process, and I remember it to this day. I can see him now in his office, and the words as they exited his mouth. I said, John, I think we could collapse this procurement process. And he said to me, Chris, that's not what we do around here. And Oh my gosh. You've dismissed a possible cost-saving, effective step to be more effective as an organization. And he just said, no, it's not what we do. It's not what we do here. And it was so stunning. I thought, wow, you're afraid. You're afraid of a new idea that
Mhm.
could be better.
The irony, though, is that one of the ways to reduce failure is to listen. So we're actively doing something to almost increase our chances of failing by not listening. I find that irony pretty interesting. The other thing that you mentioned when you were talking about the importance of listening, well, two things there. One, when it comes to communication, we're all taught how to be good speakers and how to present, and we're always taught how to put out. Communication actually has two parts. It's the talking and then it's the listening. We're never really taught how to listen. So that's a significant gap, right? So I feel like we need to move away from like communication training to
Yeah.
listening. Also, going to your vulnerability point of view, I think you can listen to somebody, you can empathize with them and still disagree with them. There's this perception that if I listen to a view that I don't agree with, it means by listening, I'm agreeing. And those are different things.
Totally agree. Yeah. I had a session with someone this week and talking to your point about communication, and I had this metaphor of the seesaw. You have a conversation with someone, you're actually on a seesaw of sort of energy. There's words, expression, body language. And this person was saying feelings a lot. I feel I feel the team know is to be done. And there was a moment of breakthrough around validation and evidence against feelings. So, they know what they're doing. I feel as if I've told them clearly enough, but there's no clarification or, you know, paraphrasing for understanding. So that person's now got, oh wow, okay. Feelings are very emotive, and where's the actual science or the evidence behind a feeling? And yeah, that was a mini breakthrough for that person, I think.
I find that interesting as well, mostly from a behavioral science perspective, because our feelings can often misguide us. I mean, sometimes they are very protective, right? Lions coming at you, I'm going to get the feeling that I need to run. Great. But oftentimes our feelings can be very misleading, and that comes from a sense of feelings come from our oldest part of the brain. And feelings, one of the functions of feelings is it serves to protect us, but it doesn't always understand the context that we're in. So this is why feelings can be very untrustworthy, because your
Yeah.
brain isn't your brain, feelings happen quickly,
Mm.
and they don't take time to go, okay, in this context, is this feeling right?
Mm.
Or in this context, should I be listening to this feeling?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where looking for the evidence really comes into place.
I do think with the advent of digital communication, there's a real well, it's a real and throbbing danger of conversational skills declining. The ability to interact and reason, have a coherent verbally based discussion, especially with the young people, with everything being online and in their smartphones. There's a real threat there to be able to self-express, adapt conversationally, and have the skills of navigation conversationally with, everything being online and instant messaging and that kind of thing. For me, that's a real concern. I sincerely know some people who they don't know how to have a conversation. They don't know, and they haven't had that sociological conditioning to have a, a inquiry and to
Mhm.
ask open questions. That they talk in a sort of a single dimension, and it's all jovial and social, but it's actually it's one way, and there's no
Mhm.
pausing or asking questions. So I don't think they've been conditioned to even have an inquiry or a conversation.
Be interesting to see I mean, social media is a part of our lives, and I'm not, like with everything else, it's balance, right? We need to actually be talking to human conversations, or multiple humans speaking to each other. So I'm not boycotting media or anything like that, but I think we have to be doing both and we have to be teaching both. But how do you, in that context where so many people spend so much of their existence online, what does that mean for failure or comfort with failure?
I think it's a lonely place. I think if you look at young people, loneliness and isolation is the huge savage paradox of social media. We know that. The evidence is in. Check out The Social Dilemma, that documentary of these Silicon Valley executives who say, "Oh my gosh, I'm in the toilet checking my Gmail at 6 a.m. with my kids running around." They know it's nuts. I've got a love-hate with social media, I'll be quite honest. I came off for about 15 months and my life was definitely brighter. I have dipped my elbow back in partly for the book marketing and the rest of it. I think if I deleted it tomorrow, my life would be a little bit brighter. If I was talking to my trainer today, there's a huge sort of sticky data spider above our heads called the internet. And we've got these smartphones that have more power than, the space shuttle. So, and I think it takes sobriety and maturity and objectivity to say, hey, look, I'm going to look at my Insta for 3 minutes every day. I'm talking here as a 53-year-old. Whereas if you're 14 and you're traumatized and where are the boundaries? Where's the discipline of thinking? Where's the means to combat that pure addiction? And I think it's a massive challenge for us. Again, back to sort of liberating simple conversational skills. We know it's here, the genie's out of the lamp. We know we live with social media. But
I think Peter can attest to his life being better without social media because he has social media profiles, but I think if you actually posted something, would bring the whole internet down just from the shock of, oh my
Sure.
God, Peter Allen's online.
You've noticed that, Danny. Yeah, that pretty much sums up my social media activity.
I mean, I like that Social Dilemma documentary where, they had uh,
Mm.
the guys in sort of the Star Trek saying, hey, Danny's looking at she's looking at Adidas. Let's hit her with an Adidas ad. And this is how it's intentionally being designed in Silicon Valley to promote addiction, to promote attention deficit, to promote, selling stuff that most of us don't need. Yeah, I'd happily ping it tomorrow. Maybe I should. Maybe I'll delete Insta as we're doing this podcast. Let's have a celebration.
Getting back on topic, as we always do on this podcast, we kind of veer off and meander back. I'd love to get your thoughts on what should leaders be doing so that their teams get more comfortable with failure?
I think there needs to be more of a narrative connection with the teams, with, their needs, their states, to have a recognition that we're not going to get things right, and for active, vulnerable role modeling of leaders. I don't see much of that in NZ. Leaders telling stories of their own frustrations or their own inner monsters of imposter that they might have fostered, even, at any level. I think that's embracing. And it's all about modeling the behavior and saying it's okay if we screw up, but let's be diligent, let's be proactive to put things right. Because businesses work in a commercial framework. So I would love to see more senior people, leaders, CEOs telling stories of failure.
Mm.
It's taboo. It's not in the mainstream culture here to have that. When was the last? Have you ever seen a male CEO cry? I wonder. Imagine that. When you see that, you move, for me as a man, you move closer to that person. You think, oh my gosh, they're human. Stand down, the armor and the command and control mindset. Say that person's human. I want to march further and longer for that person. So I think acceptance of our own fallibilities as leaders here is very important, and I think New Zealand could come a long way if that's more further embraced.
I've written a blog post about this around sharing your failure stories, because it's one of the things I do with organizations, or I suggest to organizations, if you want to drive innovation, your senior leaders need to be sharing their failure stories. And most people I say that to just blow it off. But some years ago, there was a brave enough leader that said, you know what, we're going to do this. So this is going to be a thing. And it became a thing. And they had like a whole hashtag, and it was like a big thing. Fairly large company, not in New Zealand. You had these fairly significant leaders in the organization going around, and they would start their meetings talking about a failure. They would do their town halls, and the more that they did that, and it did have a bottom line impact, because they did actually start to see like, oh wow, people are putting their hands up and sharing ideas, and like it created a buzz around where people didn't, that taboo of I can't do anything wrong started to break down.
Yeah.
So I think there's absolutely so much truth to that. I also think you're right. I don't think we have a lot of that.
And I think it's inauthentic. It's utterly inauthentic to have that, that stoicism, that sort of corporatized, almost robotic, nature to leadership and success and growth and profit. It's that person, whoever it is, they might be a parent, they might be I have an ill daughter, and it's kind of, you want to be real. I remember years ago I used this Harvard Business Review video in some of the workshops I ran, and they did this massive survey, the Harvard Business School, and they came up with 4 things that teams want. And I remember one of them particularly said they want to be read by a real person, somebody who's actually real and not a roboticized suit who's demanding, extra effort for more profit. So you want to have a connection with a human. There's a very stilted and avoidant culture in dealing with failure. And that actually creates toxic offshoots like, tall poppy syndrome. It's avoidant. And it's maybe there's a discomfort to that socially here to say, hey, I screwed up. But you need social links and permission to free yourself from that. And that has to come from above, from the leadership, to give that, subconscious permission to teams and leaders to say, hey, I screwed up as well. For me, there seems to be an avoidant culture.
I saw that in my own research, in fact, where people who felt it was safe to fail in their organizations often talked about knowing something about their leader where they failed. When I interviewed them about it, what was interesting is most people didn't attribute their comfort to knowing about when their boss had failed at something. But when we were unpacking it, they linked it back to that, which I think is interesting, because I think it's almost a subconscious connection we make. It may not even be something we're aware of, which means that the opposite is also true, right? Because if you think your boss is perfect, has never failed, that means that subconsciously we're telling ourselves.
Yeah.
That's how you become a boss, and that's how you become a leader. For me, this is really similar, almost exactly the same as that. Your shelf full of iterations, Chris, and then the final book. We see the final book, but we don't see the iterations, unless we as leaders share the fact that the challenges, the lessons we've learned on our way to becoming the leader in that particular situation at that time with the people who are leading. Then they just assume that we are this infallible, as you say, kind of robotic manager, and so they don't see, and therefore there's a disconnection between them and us, and also probably more importantly for me as leader, anyways, that if they recognize their own fallibility and that they are, as any human does, making mistakes, then they make the incorrect assumption, create the incorrect story that they're not going to become a leader. Whereas we're all every day is a prototype, and we're all prototypes of our future selves, right?
For some reason, I had an experience last year with working with someone leadership coaching, this person late 50s and from a sort of financial background. At one point they said, I've felt guilty all my career. And I was like, wow. And I asked, would you seek to collapse that story that you have and about, not being more innovative or being more creative? And there was a pause in the conversation. They looked out the window and I knew the penny had dropped that this would be such a breakthrough for this person to dissolve the guilt, but they played it safe. They played it safe. Too scary to collapse that life story, that that inner pattern, not speaking up or following your intuition, your conviction, and not being courageous at the end of the day to stand up for what you think in the face of a board. Because I said, if you believe, if you're convicted in your truth and your belief, you're free. This is what you believe in. But that person wasn't prepared to sort of enter the ring.
This has been such an awesome conversation. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's a real privilege, and right back at you in sense of the conversation and the depth. I do have the website for the book up now. It's www.avoidingpropellerblades.com. So if listeners are curious about the book, you're welcome to jump on and order a copy.
Thanks for it. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks for joining us. We really enjoy these different episodes where we get to chat with somebody else. I'm going to ask you one more question, and that relates to the book title. So the book is called Avoiding Propeller Blades, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love anything that flies. So I'm really curious, why is this book called Avoiding Propeller?
Have we got time for a short story? So my initial memoir was called 52. Am I halfway there yet? And it was stories by a twice divorced errant Geordie. So I did a book summary, and then I sent it to my book coach, and I said something along the lines of, if you read some of this, you might walk into fewer propeller blades. And he said, "Oh my God, Chris, I don't know what that means, but it's hilarious. You must call your book Avoiding Propeller Blades." So that's kind of, it just rolled off my tongue in the prose of my original book summary. And then, yeah, the concepts of the design and the art came from the designer I used. But yeah, it was just something that I thought of. And he said, no, I think that's distinctive. He thought that's pretty unique. I mean, it might be confusing to some people as well. I accept that. But that's where it came from.
I think it sparks curiosity.
Certainly does. It's like what? Got to find out more about that.
So to be clear, this is not a book about airplanes and propellers.
No. Well, it says at the top, self-leadership strategies to transform and empower your life, so that the sort of subline is making the rest of your life the best of your life. But it's an interesting point, Danny, about visualization and judgment, eh? I mean, a number of ladies I've spoken to have said, "No, I won't buy that because it's got an aircraft, because it feels maybe overtly masculine." So yeah, it was really interesting. I had about 5 book covers and I put them out to about 20 people. This is the former engineer in me. I did a bit of a statistical evaluation of their feedback. This one did come out the winner. Yeah, Avoiding Propeller Blades. I know I'm still going to walk into a few, so that's just part of life.
And that's in the spirit of that continuous learning, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I think it's very similar with our podcast. Like, we're by no means experts. We do a couple of episodes, we learn a few things, we evolve. And if you've listened to this podcast from episode 1 to now, the evolution has been, and we were very purposeful about it, because we often tell people the importance of prototyping and iterating, and here we are talking about how do we perfect this podcast before we start. So we just said, today we're going to hit record. And that's literally what we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've learned along the way, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we always close our episodes with everybody sharing one thing they're taking away from today's conversation. And since you're our guest, Chris, you can go first.
I didn't put together in my mind's eye the idea of my book and developing my book as being a sort of a design thinking process. I didn't connect the dots. Was I a design thinker in doing my book? That's quite a revelation if I was or I wasn't. So I think that's quite poignant for me. Yeah.
Nice. I really like that.
Yeah, me too. Keep us updated with that reflection. I'm going to go next, Danny, so you can finish off. This was like a a lightning bolt for me. And you said it quite early on, Chris, but my big takeaway is my only takeaway, or no, my big takeaway is accepting the inescapable reality of failure. I think that for me, that's like such a powerful phrase to. I'm probably going to put it up somewhere in front of my desk, carry it around with me inside my mind, accepting the inescapable reality of failure. Just a powerful word and concept. Failure is always going to happen. So thank you, Dani.
My takeaway is, and you also said it, Chris, pretty early on, was the comment around how long it takes you to recover from a failure depends on how long you're thinking about it. So that, because that is something I struggle with. So I think that's the thing I'm going to come back to. Like, how long am I going to struggle with this, Dani? Or, let's move on already. So, and I haven't quite thought about it that way before. So thank you.
The other thing, I guess, when we're thinking that we're not fully in the present because we might be thinking with regret, or we're not capitalizing on that moment in time. Valuable to think, well, how do I consign / contextualize what's happened? And then, hey, the sun will rise tomorrow. It's another day.
Sure will. Thanks so much, Chris. It's been a great chat.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.